January the 28th, 2017, Portsmouth, Hampshire. A cold suburban street hid a violence no one imagined. A wheelchair-bound woman moved through the night, clutching a knife, heading for a friend who owed her just £100. Victoria Margaret Arthur, once an ordinary acquaintance in a tight-knit community, now stood at the center of a brutal killing that shocked the city. How could a small debt erupt into a frenzied stabbing that ended a mother's life and shattered two families? This was not a sudden flash of temper, but a rage fueled by addiction, instability, and days of simmering threats. Inside Hampshire's most notorious women, full list of female criminals, and life sentences. Welcome to UK Real Crime, where Hampshire's streets whisper the secrets they hoped would stay buried, and the women behind its darkest cases are finally unmasked. Today, we dive into the violence, the cover-up, the conviction, and the impact this one night left behind. What you're about to hear may stay with you long after the screen goes dark. First offender, Victoria Arthur, 36 years old. January the 28th, 2017, Portsmouth, Hampshire. A debt of just £100 would end a mother's life and two women's future. Victoria Margaret Arthur, 44 years old at conviction, was a long-term heroin and alcohol addict living on Milton Road in Portsmouth. She used a wheelchair and had an extensive criminal history. 37 convictions covering 180 offences, including carrying blades in public. The victim was her friend, 36-year-old Nadine Burden. Her partner, Julie Palmer, 44, also an addict with a lengthy record of theft and deception, became her accomplice. Burden owed Palmer a £100 debt, and in the days before the attack, Arthur left a voicemail warning that bad things would happen if it was not repaid. On the night of the crime, shortly after 11 o'clock, Arthur armed herself with a knife and travelled in her wheelchair to Burden's home on Toronto Road. Inside the property, Arthur confronted Burden. A neighbour recalled hearing Arthur shout, "You're gonna have it," followed by Burden pleading, "Please stop." Burden suffered 7 stab wounds to the face, neck, and upper body. The fatal injury severed her jugular. Arthur left Burden alive, but gravely injured on the floor, wiping the door handle before leaving. Moments later, a housemate returned and found Burden in a pool of blood. She died before midnight, despite emergency efforts. Arthur fled to Palmer's home at Westminster Place. There, Palmer washed Arthur's blood, stained clothing, and the knife. When officers arrived at the property later that same night, they arrested Arthur on suspicion of murder. The investigation was meticulous. Police recovered the threatening voicemail, CCTV clips showing Arthur's movements, and eyewitness accounts describing the shouting and screams. Forensic work revealed attempts to remove traces of blood. A murder charge was authorized, and Palmer was charged with assisting an offender. Arthur's first trial was abandoned when she fell ill, leading to a full retrial in early 2018 at Salisbury Crown Court. The jury unanimously rejected Arthur's claim of self-defense and her account that she remembered little of the stabbing. She was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 23 years. Palmer received a 2-year sentence for assisting an offender. In court, Burden's father broke down as the verdict was delivered, later saying the family felt justice was done and praising the dignity shown by relatives throughout the case. Before shifting to the lessons, it is worth reflecting on how an everyday dispute spiraled into irreversible violence. From this tragedy, 3 reminders stand out. Unresolved personal conflicts, especially when money, addiction, or instability are involved, can escalate far faster than expected. Threats, intimidation, or controlling behavior should never be dismissed as normal tension. They are clear danger signals. If someone arrives at your home, angry, intoxicated, or armed, distance and immediate help are far safer than attempting to defuse the situation alone. A single night of anger can undo a lifetime of relationships. Violence closes doors that can never be reopened. Second offender, Rajvinder Kaur, 37 years old. February the 25th, 2011, Southampton, Hampshire. A family argument inside a small flat would escalate into an irreversible tragedy. Rajvinder Kaur, 37 years old at conviction, was a mother of 2 living on Broadlands Road in Southampton, and her victim was her 56-year-old mother-in-law, Baljit Kaur Buttar. At the time of the crime, she was 36 and had been coping with 6 months of tension inside her household. Mrs. Buttar had travelled from India in August 2010 to stay with the family, and was due to return home 2 days after the incident. On the morning of February the 25th, several long-building frustrations reached a breaking point. Her mother-in-law had been unkind, repeatedly insulted her, and had lashed out with a broom handle. Kaur, completely lost her self-control and exploded in a rage. Armed with a wooden rolling pin from the kitchen, she struck Mrs. Buttar in a frenzied sequence of around 20 blows. The injuries were catastrophic, focused heavily on the head and upper body. Kaur did nothing to assist her mother-in-law afterwards. Instead of calling emergency services, Kaur attempted to create the appearance of an accidental collapse. She placed the body in the bath and, according to paramedics later, was washing it with a handheld shower when help finally arrived. A call had been made reporting that a woman had suffered a heart attack. When paramedic John Pike entered the flat, he encountered shouting between Kaur and her husband, Iqbal Singh. He found Mrs. Buttar lying naked in the bath, already deceased. Police were called immediately, cordoned off the scene, and arrested Rajvinder Kaur that same night. The scene raised immediate doubts. Blood covered the bathroom floor. On closer examination of the kitchen, officers found further blood and the murder weapon, confirming this was no medical emergency. Kaur's account shifted repeatedly. She gave 14 separate police interviews, each marked by inconsistencies. Her husband and 2 friends, who had arrived after receiving frantic calls, became suspects and were detained and questioned due to her misleading statements. All were eventually released without charge. A full murder inquiry followed, led by Hampshire police. The prosecution case included forensic photographs, the rolling pin, evidence of blood spatter, and medical findings establishing severe blunt force trauma. At Winchester Crown Court, Kaur admitted manslaughter but denied murder. The prosecution maintained that provocation did not explain the extent of the injuries or her actions afterwards. The jury agreed. On July 19, 2012, she was convicted of murder. Kaur received a life sentence with a minimum term of 11 years. The judge highlighted the frenzied nature of the attack and the cruel and calculated cover-up involving her 9-year-old son. The CPS described the case as tragic in so many ways, with the victim's son and grandchildren losing 2 central figures in their lives. There were no reported protests or subsequent changes in law linked to the case. Today, Rajvinder Kaur remains in prison, serving her life sentence under the supervision of the parole board. A single moment of uncontrolled anger can leave consequences no family can ever undo. Third offender, Shaye Groves, 27 years old. July 17, 2022, Havant, Hampshire. A bedroom lined with serial killer posters became the scene that shocked the community. Shaye Groves, 27 years old, a mother of 1 living on Botley Drive, was known for her fascination with notorious murderers. Her room displayed framed images of figures such as Myra Hindley, Peter Sutcliffe, and Jeffrey Dahmer, and she collected books about violent offenders. She also kept knives, Viking axes, and a Celtic dagger. She was described as manipulative, possessive, and jealous, while she herself called her personality dark and twisted. Her victim was 25-year-old Frankie Fitzgerald, her on-off boyfriend. Their relationship was turbulent, involving alcohol, cocaine, and a shared interest in rough sexual practices. On the night of the killing, they had been drinking and using cocaine. Groves checked Fitzgerald's phone and discovered messages to someone she believed, incorrectly, to be a 13-year-old girl. This discovery ignited a jealous rage. What happened next was pieced together through evidence and testimony. There was a high possibility that Fitzgerald was attacked while asleep. Groves claimed he pinned her down after she threatened to expose the messages. Whether asleep or awake, Fitzgerald was struck first in the neck, with a Celtic dagger kept in her room. Panic, emotion, or something darker followed. She inflicted up to 22 stab wounds, most to the chest and neck. There were multiple punctures to the heart and lungs, leading to catastrophic blood loss. Groves later admitted she stabbed him in the heart when she heard a bubbling noise, realizing he was already dying. Groves immediately cleaned parts of the scene, placed bin bags beneath the body, and created a false alibi. She texted her friend, Vicky Baitup, claiming Fitzgerald had left the house. She then video called her, showing the body and giggling, while pressuring her housemate by saying, "You can't crack, you're an accomplice." These steps were copied from true crime documentaries she frequently watched. Police were called to Botley Drive later that Sunday and found Fitzgerald dead at the scene. Groves was arrested shortly afterwards. There was no evidence she physically resisted arrest, though in court she remained expressionless and reportedly smiled after being convicted. The investigation drew heavily on digital evidence, phone records, call data, and video files. One key element was footage from a bedroom camera the couple used to record consensual sexual encounters. Groves attempted to edit and repurpose the footage to create a narrative of abuse, but the original files undermined her claim of self-defense. A 5-week trial at Winchester Crown Court followed, during which the jury deliberated for nearly 18 hours. On February the 17th, 2023, they found her guilty of murder. She was sentenced 5 days later to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 23 years. The victim's family expressed profound grief, describing Fitzgerald as the youngest of 5 siblings and a devoted father whose 2 children would now grow up without him. For them, the sentence offered a measure of closure but could not undo the loss. In the end, a fascination with violence turned violently inward, leaving a family without answers and a life lost too soon. 4th offender, Suzanne Shadwell, 41 years old. November the 21st, 2009, Old Basing, Hampshire. A quiet family home became the center of a violent custody conflict that no one saw coming. Suzanne Shadwell, 41 years old, lived on Van Dyke Close in Basingstoke. A childcare worker and mother of 2, she was described by friends and relatives as an exemplary mother with a previously unblemished character. Yet behind this image was a woman locked in a bitter dispute with her ex-husband, 44-year-old David Shadwell, over access to their children. Their 9-year marriage had ended in 2006, and tensions had escalated as court orders granting him contact were repeatedly obstructed. A week before the incident, he applied for greater custody, fearing he might lose his relationship with the children entirely. On the night of the attack, Suzanne armed herself with 2 kitchen knives, measuring 12 and 18 centimeters. She dressed in dark clothing, pulled on a hooded top, latex gloves, and even used her daughter's swimming cap as part of her disguise. She broke into David's home in Old Basing after he had put their children, Lucy, 9, and Matthew, 8, to bed. She hid inside, waiting for him to fall asleep. David later described being woken by a loud bang to the head, followed by a sharp, hot, metallic stabbing sensation in his neck. A violent struggle erupted in the bedroom. He grabbed at his attacker, pulling down the hood to reveal his ex-wife. They fought on the landing, while their terrified children looked on. David suffered 5 stab wounds, including a 10-centimeter deep slash to the neck. He managed to fend her off long enough to stop the assault and call for help. Suzanne Shadwell was arrested on the night of November the 21st, 2009, immediately after the attack. Police arrived quickly and opened a major investigation. The evidence showed significant pre-planning. The disguise, the forced entry, the weapons brought from her home, and the fact that she had waited in hiding before attacking. Suzanne admitted aggravated burglary and confessed she brought the knives intending to stab him, though she claimed she changed her mind upon seeing him asleep and that the stabbing occurred during a struggle. The prosecution argued otherwise, presenting David's testimony, injury evidence, and the preparation she had undertaken. The case went before a jury at Winchester Crown Court on July 2010. The prosecution contended she acted out of anger over the custody proceedings. The judge remarked she had been brooding in your home over an injustice as you saw it, and that the attack represented a sad and extreme example of estranged parents in conflict. The defense pointed to her otherwise exemplary life and the immense stress she faced caring for a child who had leukemia. The jury convicted Suzanne of wounding with intent, rejecting both attempted murder and her claim that the stabbing was accidental. She was later sentenced at the Royal Courts of Justice to 10 years imprisonment, with 4 years for aggravated burglary running concurrently. She was ordered to serve half the sentence in custody. The case drew attention locally for the severity of the violence and the emotional impact on the 2 children who witnessed the struggle. David survived but described lasting trauma. The court acknowledged the profound consequences for the entire family. Suzanne Shadwell completed her sentence years ago, having served both the custodial term and her license period. When desperation overpowers judgment, even the most familiar places can become scenes of lasting harm. 5th offender, Jennifer Parkinson, 65 years old. March the 22nd, 2010, Gosport, Hampshire. A luxury penthouse overlooking the harbour would become the unexpected backdrop to a domestic tragedy. Jennifer Parkinson, 65 years old at the time of the incident, lived with her husband in a high-end apartment in Sanderling Lodge at Rope Quays. She was described as hot-tempered and feisty, a woman who, alongside her husband, drank heavily and often argued. Married for 20 years, their relationship had become strained under the weight of financial pressure. Their buy-to-let property empire, around 20 homes in Rutland, had once been profitable but later collapsed, at times losing them £4,000 a month before recently returning to modest profit. On March the 22nd, 2010, a day of drinking spiraled into a violent, chaotic argument. The couple rowed about the failing properties. Michael Parkinson blamed his wife for entering the market, something she said broke their promise never to accuse one another. The row escalated into physical struggle. She bit his arm. He put her in a headlock. At some point, Parkinson ran into the lounge and grabbed a 5-inch kitchen knife. In the confrontation that followed, she stabbed him 3 times. Crucially, Michael initially forced her to drop the knife. Instead of backing away, she retrieved it and delivered the fatal wound, driving the blade under his left arm, fracturing a rib, puncturing a lung, and cutting his aorta. The catastrophic blood loss proved impossible to reverse, and he died later in hospital. She was arrested shortly after the stabbing when emergency services responded, and the incident was treated as a criminal investigation. The investigation focused on the dynamics of the couple's drinking, their financial collapse, and the volatility of the argument. Forensic evidence confirmed the trajectory and depth of the knife wounds. Witness testimony reconstructed the escalating fight. Parkinson admitted manslaughter at the beginning of the trial, denying murder on the grounds she had no intent to kill. After a 7-day hearing at Winchester Crown Court, the jury unanimously cleared her of murder in April 2011, acknowledging a lack of intent despite the severity of the attack. She was sentenced the following month at age 66. Judge Guy Boney QC imposed a term of 3 years and 8 months, highlighting her deliberate act of regaining the knife and the devastating effect of the final blow. He also acknowledged her remorse. She wept as the verdict was delivered, saying she loved her husband and would miss him for the rest of her life. Unlike many high-profile cases, this one drew no protests or international attention, only quiet shock that a long marriage ended in such a sudden, alcohol-fueled eruption of violence. Jennifer Parkinson completed her sentence long ago and has lived privately since, with no further public record. A single moment of uncontrolled emotion can fracture a life far beyond repair. 6th offender, Stacey Deavin, 36 years old. January the 8th, 2022, Basingstoke, Hampshire. A short drive home after an afternoon at the pub would become a turning point of tragic finality. Stacey Deavin, 36 years old and living at Meadowside Court in Basingstoke, carried the weight of a deeply troubled childhood and long-standing mental health struggles. Diagnosed with an emotionally unstable personality disorder, she admitted that drink driving had become routine for her, just something we used to do. But on this winter evening, her long normalized behavior collided with devastating consequence, leading to the death of her boyfriend, 23-year-old Reed Ben Lewis Logue, who sat beside her in the front passenger seat. The pair spent several hours drinking at the White Hart pub. Witnesses later confirmed that Deavin drove away without turning on her headlights, already 1.8 times over the legal drink driving limit, and with cocaine in her system. At approximately 6:53 in the evening, as she traveled along Roman Road, she veered across the central reservation into the oncoming lane of Roman Way. With no attempt to brake or swerve despite having 2.5 seconds to react, her Ford Focus collided head-on with a Honda Civic, carrying 52-year-old Jennifer Olive and her 82-year-old father. All 4 occupants suffered severe injuries. Deavin and Logue were taken to hospital, but Logue never recovered from the catastrophic brain injury he sustained. He died 1 week later. Olive was left with lifelong mobility issues, now reliant on a wheelchair after a devastating pylon fracture, while her father requires an indefinite neck brace and round-the-clock care. The investigation, led by the Joint Operations Roads Policing Unit, began immediately. Officers confirmed Devin's intoxication through hospital blood tests and reconstructed the collision from road markings, eyewitness accounts, and vehicle damage. On January 17, 1 day after her hospital discharge, Deavin was arrested and interviewed. There, she openly admitted her habitual drink driving and acknowledged she knew she should not have driven that night. The evidence left little room for dispute. She pleaded guilty to causing death by careless driving while under the influence of drink or drugs. The case proceeded to Salisbury Crown Court, where Deavin appeared weeping as details were presented. The judge described her as wholly incapable of driving, emphasizing the catastrophic consequences of her choices. On November 2, 2023, she was sentenced to 8 years in prison, banned from driving for 9 years, and required to take an extended retest before ever being allowed behind the wheel again. Her defense spoke of overwhelming guilt, citing 2 suicide attempts following her arrest, but the court determined that the seriousness of the harm demanded a substantial custodial term. Community reaction reflected heartbreak and anger. Reed's sister described the loss as shattering her world. His aunt said their small, close family had been torn apart. Olive and her father, the innocent victims, expressed the profound emotional, physical, and financial toll the crash imposed on their lives. Police hoped the case would stand as a clear warning about the dangers of driving under the influence, not a technical offense, but a decision that destroys lives. In the quiet aftermath of the sentencing, one truth lingers. A single reckless moment can redraw the entire shape of every life it touches. Seventh offender, Rebecca Swanston, 28 years old. January 1st, 2012, Southampton, Hampshire. A trusted officer inside a busy city station would soon become the source of one of the force's most damaging internal scandals. The offender in this case is Rebecca Swanston, a 28-year-old former police constable based at Southampton Central Police Station. Living on Lomond Close in Portsmouth, she had once been regarded as a capable and promising young officer. However, her reputation was destroyed when between January and October 2012, Swanston repeatedly accessed restricted police systems, including intelligence databases and the records management system. During this period, she developed inappropriate relationships with criminal associates in Southampton, including Miguel Sewell, Robert Morris, and Tariq Khan. She disclosed sensitive information to them, warnings that they were wanted, details of police tactics, and intelligence that could help them avoid arrest. On one occasion, she failed to report that Sewell had been in possession of a Class A substance and had allegedly confessed to a machete attack. She even provided Morris with confidential information and 2 police shirts. Her behavior frustrated ongoing investigations and, most notably, caused a prosecution against 2 unrelated drug dealers to collapse. After the case was dropped, one of those suspects later supplied drugs to a person who died a devastating indirect consequence. Her corruption did not go unnoticed. Colleagues, concerned by her escalating behavior, reported suspicions to the Anti-Corruption Unit. With oversight from the Independent Police Complaints Commission, investigators carried out surveillance, including secretly recording incriminating conversations inside her own home. On October 2012, Swanston was arrested as part of the anti-corruption probe. Following her arrest, misconduct proceedings moved swiftly, and she was dismissed from the force shortly after. The investigation revealed a pattern of deliberate information breaches, rather than isolated lapses, reflecting behavior the judge later described as self-destructive. Swanston pleaded guilty at Winchester Crown Court to 3 counts of misconduct in a public office. In August 2013, the court heard how her actions represented a gross breach of trust in every sense, striking at the heart of public confidence in policing. The judge emphasized that she had been empowered by the information she chose to leak and had acted because she wanted to, not because she had been coerced or threatened. She received 3 years imprisonment on each count, to run concurrently. Inside Hampshire Police, the case prompted a strong internal reaction, with senior officers praising the integrity of those who reported her behavior. Although no widespread protests or public campaigns followed, the case reinforced the seriousness of corruption within public office and the far-reaching consequences it can carry. Today, Swanston has long completed her sentence, though her current whereabouts and occupation are unknown. Some breaches destroy more than rules, they fracture the trust a community depends on every day. 8th offender, Lynsay Railton, early 40 years old. August 1st, 2016, Eastleigh, Hampshire. What began as a routine hiring decision would quietly unfold into 2 separate fraud schemes, spanning years and 2 employers. The offender is Lynsay Railton, an accountant and finance manager who lived on Boyett Crescent in Eastleigh. Her age appears differently across reports, 40, 45, but she was in her early 40s during the first case and mid-40s during the second. Railton had built a professional life based on financial responsibility, yet behind the scenes, she struggled with chronic anxiety, depression, and the lasting effects of a brain injury sustained 2 years before her first sentencing. Despite these personal challenges, she occupied positions of trust in both companies. Her notoriety stems from 2 major fraud cases. The first occurred at Universal Marine Medical, a Romsey-based pharmaceutical supplier for ships. Employed in August 2016 as a trusted finance manager, she began stealing within just 3 weeks, ultimately conducting 90 false transactions over a 9-month period. Between August 2016 and May 2017, she siphoned off £34,204. She used the funds for household bills, holidays, and luxury purchases, including a £150 bottle of pink champagne. The crimes were only detected when discrepancies threatened the company's financial stability and risked potential job losses. The second case unfolded between July 2021 and May 2022 at Fairpay Construction Limited, based in Basingstoke. Working as an accountant, Railton transferred £19,942.10 from company accounts into her personal Monzo account, misused the company credit card to pay for fuel, and even purchased holiday euros with company funds. Her fraudulent methods included direct bank transfers, unauthorized card usage, and manipulating payroll details such as her tax code. In both cases, she was described as extremely clever in covering her tracks. Investigations into her actions relied heavily on forensic accounting. At Universal Marine Medical, internal audits identified anomalies in financial reports. The director of operations emphasized that had the theft continued, the company would have been forced to cut costs, endangering jobs. At Fairpay Construction, documentation clearly linked her personal financial gain to company losses. Her fraudulent activity was systematic, repeated, and deliberate, demonstrating planning over extended periods. Both cases were prosecuted in Hampshire courts. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and theft in the first case, and to a single count of fraud in the second. At 2018, at Southampton Crown Court, she received a 2-year suspended sentence, partly because of her brain injury, mental health difficulties, and repayment of £20,000. In June 2023, at Winchester Crown Court, she was sentenced to 1 year in custody for the second offence, acknowledging the repeated breach of trust. She served half her sentence behind bars and has since completed all custodial requirements. No appeals were recorded. The public reaction centered on the betrayal felt by the victim companies. Colin Rees of Universal Marine Medical said Railton totally betrayed our trust, noting the seriousness of her actions and the risk they posed to employees' livelihoods. There were no wider protests or societal movements linked to the case. Today, Lynsay Railton is no longer in custody, and her current occupation is unknown. Even quiet offices can conceal the slow damage of deception, revealed only when the numbers no longer add up. Ninth offender, Ellie Hinton, 28 years old. August 10, 2020, Netley Abbey, Hampshire. A seemingly ordinary visit to a friend's home would mark the beginning of a trail leading straight into one of the most unsettling betrayals of trust inside a care home. The offender is Ellie Mae Barbara Hinton, a 28-year-old care worker living in Leah Gardens, Eastleigh. Employed at Netley Court Care Home, she held a role built entirely on trust, caring for elderly residents, many suffering from dementia. Yet behind that professional facade, she was battling a cocaine and alcohol addiction. It was this addiction that shaped the crimes for which she would become known. Hinton visited a friend's home to use their swimming pool. Shortly after she left, jewelry belonging to the homeowners was discovered missing. At this stage, no direct suspicion was placed on her. Hinton's partner noticed unfamiliar jewelry inside their home. When questioned, Hinton provided no credible explanation. The partner invited the homeowners to identify the items, and they immediately recognized some of the pieces as those missing from their house. Further jewelry none belonging to the household was found. Pawnbroker receipts were also discovered, revealing that Hinton had repeatedly sold items at several Southampton pawn shops. This raised concerns that the thefts extended beyond the single incident at the friend's home. As Hinton worked at Netley Court Care Home, investigators cross-referenced the recovered jewelry with reports from the care home. Families had been unable to visit residents due to COVID restrictions, creating an environment in which missing items had gone unnoticed. The matches confirmed that the thefts involved multiple residents, several elderly, and some suffering from dementia. Police arrested Hinton. She did not resist arrest. During questioning, she admitted stealing jewelry from both the homeowners and the vulnerable residents at the care home. She also identified the individuals from whom she had taken items. Officers obtained CCTV, sales logs, and item records from local pawnbrokers. They recovered multiple pieces of jewelry linked to specific victims, including sentimental items expected to be returned to families. The receipts showed a pattern of repeated pawning over several weeks. Investigators conducted a detailed audit of missing personal belongings. Staff members confirmed several residents' items had been unaccounted for since late summer. This audit expanded the list of victims and validated Hinton's admissions. Based on her confession, recovered evidence, and the documented pattern of thefts, Hinton was charged with 16 counts of theft. She later pleaded guilty at Southampton Crown Court. The judge, Christopher Parker, emphasized the cruelty of her actions. She stole from some of the most vulnerable people in society, abusing her position in a way that left families deeply distressed. The sentencing resulted in 2 years' imprisonment, a fixed term reflecting the seriousness of the breach of trust and the repeated nature of the thefts. No appeal was reported. Public reaction focused on the emotional harm caused to the victims and their families. Police noted hopes that the sentence would bring a measure of justice, especially for families whose loved ones had passed away before their property was returned. Today, Ellie Hinton is serving her sentence, with her release expected halfway through the term. Even in places built for safety, The smallest acts of betrayal can fracture what trust is meant to protect. Final offender, Abisola Ajayi, 30 years old. April 7, 2024, Aldershot, Hampshire. A routine patrol in a quiet town centre would unexpectedly unravel a well-organised drug operation. The offender in this case is Abisola Ajayi, 30 years old at the time of her conviction and sentencing. Though her home address was recorded as Dean Road in London, her criminal activity was centred in Aldershot, Hampshire, where she operated a Class A drug supply network. Investigators later linked her to a nearby property on Queen's Road, which functioned as a storage and distribution base. In early April, during proactive police patrols targeting County Lines activity, officers observed Ajayi in the municipal gardens area, acting suspiciously. On April 7th, a mobile phone linked to drug distribution was discovered, prompting officers to detain her at the scene. When questioned, the device's contents quickly connected her to active supply lines. This discovery triggered a broader investigation into her movements and the properties she frequented. A subsequent search at a Queen's Road address revealed the scale of the operation. Inside, officers found a significant quantity of Class A drugs, crack cocaine and powdered cocaine, with an estimated street value of £11,000. They also located offensive weapons, mobile phones, £900 in cash, and a collection of high-value designer items from brands such as Louis Vuitton, Prada, Dior, and Moncler. Police stated these goods were consistent with a drug dealer funding a lavish lifestyle rather than legitimate income. Officers catalogued physical evidence, analyzed the seized devices, and connected her to multiple counts of drug supply. The charges included 3 counts of possession with intent to supply Class A drugs, 2 counts of being concerned in the supply of Class A drugs, possession of criminal property, and possession of a weapon capable of discharging a noxious substance. Investigators noted that the presence of such a weapon indicated readiness for potential violence, a known risk factor in County Lines operations. Her case proceeded to Winchester Crown Court, where she pleaded guilty to all charges. On June 5, 2024, she was sentenced to 42 months in prison. The court highlighted the seriousness of high-level drug dealing and the harm inflicted on communities through addiction, exploitation, and associated crime. Hampshire police expressed relief at removing both the drugs and a persistent dealer from circulation, emphasizing that the conviction underscored their commitment to tackling organized supply networks. While there were no public protests or large-scale social reactions, local commentary reflected concern about the presence of drug operations in smaller towns and appreciation for the decisive policing response. Ajayi is currently serving her custodial term and will remain under license following her release. This case serves as a reminder that organized drug networks often operate quietly within ordinary neighborhoods. Stay alert to unusual activity, frequent short visits, unfamiliar individuals, or sudden displays of unexplained wealth. Never ignore signs of exploitation or drug harm in your community. Early reporting can prevent criminal networks from taking root or expanding. Even quiet streets can conceal organized harm, and a single arrest may reveal far more than anyone expected. And just like that, another hidden story from Britain's underworld is brought into the light. But remember, behind every quiet street, every ordinary doorway, there can be secrets waiting to be uncovered, and we're only scratching the surface of the UK's most unsettling real crime cases. If you want to be the first to explore the next dark twist or shocking investigation, make sure you subscribe to UK Real Crime and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload the moment it drops. Have a case you think deserves to be exposed, a mystery, a criminal, or an overlooked tragedy you want us to dig into? Leave your suggestions in the comments. Your idea might be the next story we bring into focus. Stay curious, stay vigilant.